Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we are covering how to quickly choose formations for your garrisons. Garrisons are important to Rise of Kingdoms, and the formation you choose can have a huge impact on that. So we are going to be covering the best formation for your garrison for the end game with the specialty inscriptions. First, for skill damage commanders, Wedge is the way to go. This includes Jan, Eleanor, Dido, Flavius, Lapu Lapu, and most commanders who go with these. The inscriptions further boost rage gain and skill damage, making their damage more potent. Second, for normal damage commanders, Arch is the way to go. This includes Gorgo, Zeno, Constantine, and most pairing partners for those commanders. Lastly, for shielding commanders, you can use either Hollow Square or Testudo. This is most notably used on Hera and Gorgo when you use Gorgo situationally, and any other future shielding commanders. Note that Testudo only becomes better at more than 40% shield uptime, so choose based on how consistent your shielding is in defense. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we cover why health is so important. Health is by far the most impactful of the three main stats, and we'll go over the two major reasons that's the case. First is how health operates. Health increases the amount of damage the enemy needs to do to wound a unit, which reduces severely wounded units directly and indirectly counteracts a portion of that enemy's damage through attack, which is primarily what KvK tech gives, as well as attack being such a prevalent stat in essentially everything. Because of this, health reduces severely wounded units naturally, while also negating a portion of an enemy's stats, making it doubly valuable. Second, health is by far the least available of all three major stats. This makes it much less susceptible to diminishing marginal returns, the process by which successive increases in a stat result in less overall gain. This means even if you optimize for every last drop of health, you still won't come close to that diminishing marginal returns, and you can get extra value out of it. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we cover what makes Wedge formation so powerful in the meta overall. When it comes to formations, Wedge is king. Even with Scipio Milianus and William Wallace, a vast majority of commanders currently in the meta are primarily Wedge formation commanders. This comes from two fronts. First, Wedge gives skill damage boosts, which essentially boosts 90% of the commanders in the meta's primary source of damage. This means that Wedge is a natural choice even if you're not sure. And unless you have a shield or some sort of normal damage, Wedge is basically the single biggest increase in effectiveness as a base level. Second, the specialty inscriptions of Wedge do a great job of being super effective for most playstyles. Whether you need more damage, more rage gain, or anything in between, you get that from those specialty inscriptions. The widening niche keeps more commanders in the Wedge niche without incentivizing other formations as well, keeping Wedge firmly at the top of the charts for formations. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we cover armament recycling and how to decide what to keep and what to recycle. When it comes to armaments, you don't want to be caught flat-footed, which means you want to keep your options open and not recycle something you may need. But you also don't want too many armaments cluttering your inventory and gathering dust. And the more you can recycle, the sooner you can start racking up specialty inscriptions. So in today's video, we will go over how I decide what to keep and what to get rid of. First, try to keep one armament for each of the major troop types, except V formation, where you'll want to keep just siege items. You want to keep the best single one for each troop type, and to determine which one that is, you'll want to use the point system. For the point system, each armament stat geared towards that unit is a point. For example, a Wedge armament with 2 cavalry stats and 1 archer is worth 2 points for cavalry, but 1 for archer. Inscriptions that are combat specific are worth an additional point, and in the end, you're going to want to keep what has the most points. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we are covering why stat growth isn't necessarily linear. When you see a piece of equipment, armament, or skill bonus that gives health, defense, or attack, it has a defined value. 12% health, 3.5% attack, 7.5% defense. These stats boost your effectiveness in combat, but a common mistake is to consider them as linear. For example, early on, a 12% health bonus, when you don't have any other health, will improve your health by close to 12%. But once you start having technology, armaments, gear, runes, all boosting stats, that bonus successively diminishes. For example, in our original example, a single item boosting health by 12% and no other boost is about a 12% growth. However, in the same example, if you already have 50% bonus to health, that 12% boost is more like an 8% versus the prior stat value. This applies to each of the main stats. In the end, it doesn't necessarily upset the balance of any stat, but it's important to consider. A big issue on armaments and inscriptions is what the most important part is for the armament system. So in today's video, I wanted to cover the major portions of this. Due to how broad they are, I'm going to break it down into 3 phases. First, in the early game, when you're just starting to get armaments, the formation itself has its own most important part. It constitutes the majority of your bonus stat because it gives you a flat amount. And it leans heavily towards wedge and arch because skill and normal damage. Once you start to get built up purple and gold armaments, the stats become the most important, as the skill damage doesn't really stack up to 10% health across 4 different items. This is where formations are the most flexible, as the raw stats lead to a lot of variety. However, once you start reaching the end of armament buildup in the endgame content, the importance flexes back to formations, as the specialty inscriptions are tied to formations. So you want to have the specialty inscriptions that best optimize your type, and therefore are best in sync with that specific formation, so then you are more constrained by formations again. Here are the best legendary equipment pieces to build first as you're starting to go up to legendaries. First, for archers, the Dragon's Breath chest or the Milky Way is the best. Switching out defense for health is great, and 12% is a huge boost, and overall you'll probably pick it based on your preference and what you have available, but both are great options because they're essentially the same percentage. Next, for cavalry, we have Navarre's Control. This is a really solid piece with 8% health, and it doubles the value of the next best equipment piece overall, making a nice spike in stat that is fairly easy to acquire versus the set pieces. Last, but certainly not least, for infantry, we have the Hope Cloak. This is one of my favorite pieces. It's actually the first legendary piece I ever built, and it is one of the top overall in the fairly weak set of infantry chest pieces, so it makes a huge jump in your overall efficiency as a gear set. Here are some tips to help newer players in your kingdom if you're an established player. As the game continues, you get new players, even in established kingdoms. So here are a few tips to help bring them up to speed and be a true friend of the kingdom. First, if you can manage it, help them out with events, Soroli, Ian's Ballads, and if you want to help them by reinforcing their cities during Shadow Legion. These little acts don't take much, and in fact they're probably much easier for you, but they give those new players a huge boost in the early stages, particularly if they're just starting to build up, while they also get to learn good combat habits and good tactical habits from you. Second, don't be afraid to answer their questions. Even if you can't answer them perfectly, getting them on the right track is better than being completely blind in the pursuit of their answers, and could save them a ton of headache and bad investments. And last, but certainly not least, be patient. What may be obvious to you as a player may not be clear to a new player. Especially as you play more and more, we take more information for granted, so patience is key. We have 2 new daily chess commanders. With the most recent update, we got 2 new daily chess commanders, Joan Prime and Jan. But are either of them really worth building? For me, both are a resounding yes. For different reasons. Joan is completely entrenched in the meta, and it is impossible to pass her up. So being able to get a few extra heads to build her up faster, on top of her being valuable at less than maxed, is perfect for what daily chess commanders should be. On the other side, Jan is less of a definite yes, but he is still a yes. He's an absolute beast, both versus normal damage and skill damage, not to mention swarm. However, he's less great as a daily chess commander since you really want him maxed to be perfect. But if you just maxed Eleanor, you're in luck, because he's great with Eleanor and you can start working on him gradually as you're building up that pair, and either choice is a great option. When it comes to building field pairings, there are 2 main strategies, the generalist and specialist strategy. In today's video, we're going to cover both. First, the generalist. This strategy involves focusing broadly, finding value commanders that can be used unmaxed to get additional heads for more pairs, more garrisons, more rallies, or more field pairs. This is also along the lines of having a balanced strength. Instead of having one A++ march, they use several B+ marches. This is great for the group in general, but at times will cost you weaker ability 1 versus 1. Opposite is the specialist strategy, which involves maxing commanders in one specific troop type, or focusing on keeping them all in one pairing, and focus on matching them first. This makes stronger pairings that tend to be, well, more specialized. This greatly increases the potency of those pairs, but typically limits further pairings, giving fewer pairs that are generally stronger, but also frees up marches for rally and garrison fill. Overall, it'll be the decision of you as to which playstyle you prefer. When it comes to a new commander coming out, a lot of speculation is around whether they'll be garrison viable, whether they're garrison or not. So in today's video, I want to give you some idea of what to look at if you're wanting to consider this. First, how many of the skills are actually eligible for garrison use? How many of the skills say they need to be in the field? If they say they need to be in the field or off alliance territory or leading a rally, it won't work in a garrison, so you're losing that skill. Second, are the skills that are garrison eligible also key mechanical parts of the commander's kit and not just stat blocks? There's plenty of stats on all these commanders, so if you're only getting stats and you're not getting key mechanical parts, you're better off just going with another garrison commander that has that same stat block. Last, but certainly not least, does this commander's kit that has a garrison viable option match up with another garrison commander's kit? If you don't have any synchronicity, you're just going to have conflicting damage sources or conflicting ways of defeating enemies, and it just ends up being not a clean option. This is a William Wallace commander review. William Wallace got released alongside Scipio Milianus, but I don't want him being overshadowed by Scipio Milianus because he has an interesting field kit with his high single target damage factor and with his overall great buffs for troops on the map. Tack on the fact that you have an 80% chance to increase a smite damage factor by 20 or 40%. It could be insane the amount of damage he can put out quickly, and he does have some potential to be viable in the rally meta as well because of that. For talents, you want to use something like this in the blue tree without these 3 ranks in Pack-a-Punch, and you want to go to at least hold the line on the infantry tree. You can go 2 out of 5 of Thunderous Smite and get some more investment as well into the red tree if you would like. For formations, Arch is definitely the big one. For pairings, it's going to be pretty much Scipio Milianus or Liu Che, depending on your situation, because they're both smite damage commanders. And for the meta, I think he's going to be great in the field as well as potentially in rallies. Another popular question I get in Rise of Kingdoms is who to build first from Nevsky or Huo. Both are extremely popular field commanders and both have a ton of potential with other field commanders in the Cav meta. So which should you choose? First, let's cover where Nevsky is better. Nevsky is better at boosting allied damage with his defense break on his primary skill, as well as having a great sustained damage with his overall damage boosts. Tack on extremely consistent sustained fighting ability with his health, and he makes a great generalist commander and the better option for generalist players. Next, for Huo. Huo has a much stronger primary skill and a much stronger early skill damage with that 60% skill damage boost for the first 15 seconds of a fight that falls to 30, allowing him to put out insane burst damage in a short period of time. Tack on the Autumn Wind skill and expertise, and you can quickly create a snowball effect if you can defeat enemies quickly. Overall, though, there can only be one choice, and that choice does go to Nevsky for me because he's the better generalist option. Here are 3 legendary commanders that deserve to be revisited as a prime commander. Prime commanders have been exclusively used as epics, being turned into legendary, but if Lilith ever decides to revisit the prime versions with legendaries, here's where they should look first. First, we have Alexander. Alexander was a staple of the meta for a long time prior to Season of Conquest, and has huge name recognition. Giving him a prime version would be great for marketing, as well as giving a lot of history to build his kit off of. Next, we have Khan. Take what I said about Alexander and dial it to 1,000. You have a ton of history, a decent relevant streak in the meta, and it would instantly be a recognizable name if remade into a meta Cav commander, making him an ideal choice. Last, but certainly not least, we have Caesar. Caesar already had an interesting kit with potential, and revisiting and retooling it for the smite damage meta would work perfectly as a generalist along the lines of what Scipio Prime was when he was reworked, where if a similar but strengthened kit were used, he could be useful in every portion of the game from field to game.